really are.
Carbon Canyon several times to see those and understand. You've been up there as well.
I have, yeah. I mean, that one there just off the river is huge. I mean, it's humongous. I saw the picture of you standing next to one of those folds, and you're like a little tiny speck film there.
Huge cliff face,
Yeah.
and it's just all bent and folded and twisted. And
You know, but I think about that other huge fold. What is the name of that fold again?
the Carbon Canyon
Yeah,
fold.
the Carbon Canyon fold, and you think about how much material was bent. I think about what in the world was causing that? What kind of force
Right.
was involved in making that much material, massive material, I guess, move the way it did?
Well, Del, the interesting thing is that's just a very small side canyon of Grand Canyon. And of course, Grand Canyon's really big, right?
Yeah.
But Grand Canyon is just really small compared to the amount of material that was lifted up in the western United States. It wasn't just the area of Carbon Canyon that was lifted or the area of Grand Canyon. It was the whole western United States that got lifted up. And even more than that, all the continents of the world got lifted up after the flood. And we know that from Scripture, not just from geology, but Scripture hints at that as well. In Psalm 104 and verse 8, it talks about the mountains rising up and the valleys sinking down at the end of Noah's flood.
Well, now you're talking about mountains being lifted up. You know, I live next to Pikes Peak, and you think about something lifting Pikes Peak, and of course Pikes Peak is nothing compared to some of the mountains
Right.
around the world, but if you're talking about continents being lifted up, what kind of force is involved that would do that?
Yeah, there's got to be some kind of force, not just to lift up a mountain, but whole mountain ranges and whole continents. And the interesting thing is as we study mountain ranges as geologists, a lot of the high rugged mountain ranges date to about the same time. Conventionally, most of them are Cenozoic. We would think that would be early post-flood time is when they date, about when they formed right after the flood. And so you have these mountains being lifted up all over the world. It wasn't just a local process like in Colorado to lift up Pikes Peak. This was a worldwide process where mountains on every continent were being lifted up. And the forces had to be amazing. But I think I can help you understand what some of those forces were like. Let me show you an example. Here we have two different types of rock. This one is a type of basalt, and you can feel that. And this is the kind of rock that we typically see on the floor of the ocean. It's a volcanic rock.
Yeah.
And it's heavy. It has a density of about 3.2, 3.3, right about in there. So that means that it's about 3 times or so heavier than water.
Feels more than that.
Yeah. And here's a piece of granite about the same size.
Oh.
And you can see the difference here.
Yeah.
This is what Pikes Peak is made out of.
Okay.
This has a density of about 2.6. And this is the basalt. And you can see they're about the same size, but the granite is lighter. And so what we think happens is within the earth that the lighter stuff tends to rise up compared to the heavier stuff that sinks. And whenever you have something sinking, something else is going to go up somewhere else.
So kind of like on a waterbed, if you put something really heavy,
That's right.
even though there's something else on there, it'll lift it up. Is that what was going on?
That's a really good analogy, is that, you know, on a waterbed, when you push down one spot, it rises up in another, right?
Yeah.
And so if you look at mountain ranges around the world, usually when you see a really high mountain range, there's a really low spot right next to it. It happens in California. You have Mount Whitney, which is the highest place in the 48 states, was at 14,500 feet or so.
Oh, that's a beautiful mountain.
And then just to the east of there, you have Death Valley, which is the lowest spot in the United States, right? And so that's typical around the world. And you see, you know, really deep ocean trenches next to really high mountain ranges like the Peru-Chile Trench and the Andes Mountains.
So if you push down, even at like a local area, you can talk about, you know, the Death Valley and so forth, you push something down, something's got to
Something goes back up. And so this lighter stuff tends to rise because of its lower density. This is called isostasy in geological terms. But the other thing that can make things rise is heat. So if you have some heating down below this will rise compared to this, which is cold, and it will sink. So there's some other things just besides density that can make things go.
So this is now happening all over the world. So Noah gets off the ark, and to some extent, I guess what you're saying is that the earth is unstable. Even after the flood, it's unstable because you've got this heavy stuff on the waterbed and you've got this light stuff. And so he gets off the ark in a world where all this is now taking place. I mean, that is a radically new way to think.
Yeah, and so you read the account in Genesis 9 and Genesis 8 and 9, and it almost seems like Noah's hesitant to get off the ark. He's been on there for a year already, but he's like sending out the raven and the dove and thinking, is it safe? He's probably seeing the volcanoes in the mountains of Ararat erupt. There's going to be earthquakes in that area and so on. Probably still some rain and whatnot. And he's thinking, is it time to get off yet?
Yeah.
And I think he was worried because he saw all of these geological things happening around him.
So, John, I want to ask you this question about, and we've talked a lot about the catastrophic processes that are going on after the flood. How does all of that was happening during the flood, including, I remember we were talking earlier to Steve and even to Kurt about the plates and how all those were moving. How does that fit into the post-flood?
Yeah. Well, one of the theories we have, as you know, Del, is catastrophic plate tectonics. And basically what that means is that we think that the seafloor and the continents were moving at rates of feet per second during the flood. So
that's a lot faster than what we've been.
Yeah, like the rate of a jog or a fast walk or something like that. So pretty quickly for a piece of continent or seafloor to be moving. And so we think it's moving catastrophically during the flood, but then as the flood comes to an end, that process is going to slow down to today's rates. And, there's differences of opinions on this, but I think that it didn't slow down immediately, but it kind of slowed down in maybe a logarithmic way. So when Steve Austin talks about exponential decline in geologic processes after the flood, I think the continents are slowing down in the same way. We can kind of see how they moved if we look at a world relief globe over here. So this is one of my favorite teaching tools. But, notice that even the ocean floor is covered with mountains.
Yeah.
Mountains are just not on the continents, that are on the ocean floors as well. And we think that all of these features, all of these mountains and so on the ocean floor and the continents formed during the flood, a lot of them. And then especially on the continents, if we take a look at the continent of North America here, we can see the large area of the Rocky Mountains. Sometimes the geologists call it the North American Cordillera. It's actually a collection of mountain ranges here in the western part of North America. And what we think happened is there was a plate that moved across the Pacific Ocean that actually lodged itself underneath of this western part of North America. We can't see the plate anymore, it's at depth, but as that plate got shoved under the western part of North America, it forced this whole area of the western part of the continent to rise.
Would this be a plate then that's heavier than this, or did it just happen to go underneath it?
Yeah, we think this plate, it was heavier, and that's why it goes underneath the North American continent. So it's a big piece of ocean floor. But this plate didn't dive down into the earth like a lot of the other plates. For some reason, it kind of got shoved laterally under North America, and so it made these mountains rise as it got shoved underneath. And so this whole collection of mountains right here The rising of these mountains is sometimes related to the Laramide orogeny, named after Laramie, Wyoming, which is right out in this area. But a lot of these mountains were rising up at this time. From a conventional view, it would have been early on in the Cenozoic. From a flood perspective, very late in the flood, very early in the post-flood time.
So this plate movement is going on all over the globe. Is that during the flood?
Yes, during the flood, the plates are moving, and then as the flood comes to an end and Noah and the animals get off, that plate movement is going to slow to the rates that we see today.
And that's how all the continents as we know them today, that's how they moved into the places currently?
Yeah, the continents were in different positions before the flood. So if we were to look at a map of the world as the flood began, the globe would look very different than what it does now. Even as the flood came to an end, the continents of Africa and South America would have been a little bit closer together. Europe and North America would have been a little closer together. So there was still some movement, I think, into the post-flood times. But after the flood was over, pretty close to what we have today.
And what was causing those plates to move? I mean, it boggles my mind to think the continents are so huge. What would cause them to move and to move so rapidly?
Yeah, so we have to have an energy source from somewhere. We have to have some energy. And what has been suggested by John Baumgartner is that the energy that drove the plate movement was actually the pre-flood ocean floor. And he thinks this pre-flood ocean floor was heavy, that for some reason it began to sink down into the earth, and that falling material, as you let something fall and drop, it releases energy. And he thinks that pre-flood ocean floor sinking into the earth actually released energy in the form of heat, and it was that heat energy that drove these processes that happened during the flood.
Well, looking at this globe, I am struck by the unevenness of the ocean floor. Can I turn this around?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if you look, this is the Pacific Ocean, isn't it?
Yeah, here's Hawaii right here to give you an idea.
Yeah. I mean, look, this is amazing to me. Is this all volcanic activity?
Yeah, most of these little bumps and ridges and so forth are volcanoes that have popped up here and there. And some of them are quite recent, like, down at the southern end of the Hawaiian Islands, Kilauea has been going off for quite a few years now, but that's located right down here at the end of this long ridge of volcanoes.
And is this then mostly post-flood? I mean, if I look at, gee, John, this is amazing. So
Yeah.
I used to think the ocean floor was nice and smooth. It's not. So it's just filled with it's like the earth is oozing magma, I guess, right?
Yeah, you have to be a little careful, Del. This globe actually has some vertical exaggeration on it, just so things would stand out. But yes, the ocean floor does have a lot of relief on it. It's not flat and smooth like most people think. Some of these features would have formed during the flood, and many of them would have formed in the post-flood times.
But again, it's a picture that, the earth is active, and that not only are plates moving and everything that we talked about, but even the ocean itself is still producing islands. Well, what else do you think is going on in the post-flood
We
world?
eventually want to get back and talk about these folds down in Grand Canyon. So Grand Canyon is right here in this area right here, and it's a part of this giant area of the western United States that's been lifted higher.
So we have this continental shelf that has now shoved this up, and when that happened, all the things we talked about earlier are going on. There's precipitation, there's
volcanic activity, earthquakes, landslides, and there's steep mountainsides that aren't very stable, and so they fail and slide. There's lots of rain that's being dumped in these areas, making glaciers and lakes, and some of those lakes are failing and causing catastrophic flooding and so on. And so I see the post-flood times, especially in the areas of these mountainous regions, I see there being a lot of catastrophe there, and good reason that we would expect a lot of catastrophe there.
And so this still volatile crust, I guess, is that behind what we see in those folds? Because something has changed, something has either come up or gone down to make those folds.
Yeah, so as this whole western part of the United States rises up, the rocks are still going to be soft here. They were just deposited less than a year previous to this whole area rising up. And so as things rise up, if the sediments have not been turned into solid rock yet, they're going to bend a little bit. But yeah, this energy that we see that from this uplift is expressed in areas like folds and, you know, even bigger yet, mountains. So as we look here at the western United States, we can see.
I love these maps, by the way. These are awesome.
It's a nice relief map, isn't it? So here's Colorado. This is the area that your home is in.
Yes.
Grand Canyon would be right through here. Here's the Great Salt Lake up here. And you can see this entire western part of the United States is mountainous. Really, the only part that's low on elevation is here in the San Joaquin Valley out in California. It's fairly close to sea level. In fact, it had ocean water in there at times. It's a lot lower in elevation. Of course, Death Valley in here is quite low as well. But most of the rest of the western United States is quite high in elevation. And that compares to the lower elevation that's here in the east, with the exception being the Appalachians, which are not quite as high as the Rockies.
So when the continent was lifted up, where did all that material go when it was eroded?
So a lot of the material ends up in these valleys in between the basins. And so you can see here in places like Nevada and western Utah, there's a ridge, a valley, a ridge, a valley. Sometimes we call this the Basin and Range province out this way. And as the mountains are lifted up, the eroded materials end up down in the valleys. And so a lot of it's still there. It's just changed form. It's no longer in rock. It's sediment that's sitting down in the bottoms of these big valleys.
Did any of that material flow eastward into the plains?
Very little of it. Some of the stuff that's out here on the edges of the Rocky Mountains would have come this way, but a lot of the stuff would have remained right here in these areas. Some of the exceptions might be in the Colorado River drainage, where obviously you have a canyon that has to be made there, but as you can see, it's a relatively small amount of material compared to the volume of the entire West.
And it's easy then to see with this relief map how you can get basins formed and water then collecting from all that precipitation.
Right, so as you see the Great Salt Lake right here, there's mountains all around the Great Salt Lake, and so all the rivers next to that basin would have flowed into that lake. And so that lake was much bigger, and eventually the Great Salt Lake overflowed and spilled into the Snake River drainage, which is right in there.
Well, John, this is the kind of thing that I don't think we think about a lot, and that is just the amount of carving and everything else that was going on post-flood. And I can't even imagine the size of the storms and everything that must have been occurring at that time, because compared to today, those things are, I don't know how many times more, but it seems like they were tremendous. It would have been a very difficult world to live in.
It would have been not just the volcanoes and earthquakes and things like that, but if you live near these warm oceans, there's going to be continual storms that come in. We know that when it gets to be summertime down here in the Gulf of Mexico and along the Atlantic coast, especially in late summer and the water gets very warm, there's hurricanes that come in here. And a few years ago, there was a big hurricane that came into the Houston area, dumped 3 or 4 feet of rain here. This is pretty close to sea level, so it didn't cause a lot of erosion. But if you put a big storm in here, where there's high elevation, then it has the opportunity to really dig a deep, deep canyon.
John, it seems to me that with all the catastrophic events we had going on during the flood, laying down all of the sedimentary layers, and then we have all of these catastrophic events that happen after the flood.
Right.
As a geologist, how do you know where one ends and the other begins?
Yeah, that's a really good question.